Hello, everybody. What is going on? Real quick before I get started, is everything okay audio, visual wise? I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. I was fiddling around with my settings a little bit earlier. Hello, hello. Okay, so I'm not seeing any issues with the audio or the video. So I'll give it one more minute in case we have any stragglers who want to join. And then we can go ahead and get started. Actually, let me move my camera a little bit over. There we go. So how is everybody doing on this lovely Sunday? I know a lot of people are probably watching the World Cup game, or probably were watching the World Cup game. It was very interesting. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. And before we get started, actually, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Varun Patel. Online, I go by the name of Blue Hand Coding. You may know me from TikTok. That's sort of my main domain, my main place, if you will. But I'm proud to be one of your Replit reps as well. And this month, December, I'm doing my Replit event about Python tips and tricks. So this lesson, this course, if you will, is really helpful for people of all levels. Let me move my notes over here real quick. And it's really not too complicated. It's just a bunch of little snippets that'll help enhance your coding experience, make life a little bit easier. And as you know from the title, it's Python tips and tricks. So as far as how this will convert over to other languages, I can't really say, but I'm sure there are some concepts that you can sort of research, look into, that'll overlap fairly well. So without any further ado, let me hop into Replit. Ta-da! Look at that magical sort of transition. So actually, let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go. That's easier to see. So here we are in Replit, and the first one, right, we're just going to jump straight into it, is fairly simple. So Python, as you know, has two modes. After all, it's a scripting language. So you have your normal, you write a script like print hello world. Oops, hello world. You run that, you get your output, right? However, there's also the interactive interpreter. So as a scripting language, you can come over here into our Replit shell, right? And if we type in Python, we can write Python lines of code one by one. Hydrogen macro asks, did I miss anything? Nope, we just got started. So if I'm here in my interactive shell, what I can do is I can just write code on the fly. So I can say a variable r is equal to 5. What's r plus 10? 15. I'm able to sort of interact with Python code really quickly, really efficiently. So let's say you're in this interactive mode and you're messing around with some objects, you're messing around with some numbers just to test out, some theory that you're working with. So let me actually clear this one more time. So let's say we're doing some simple addition, right? Let's say we have a variable named r, and r is equal to 9. And we'll say, what's 9 to the power of 2, right? It's 81. Now this return value, right, 9 to the power of 2, this return value, I can access it again later on in my code by using this underscore. So if I use this underscore right here and I press enter, I get 81 again. So basically what this underscore does is it saves the last returned value to it so you can reference it. So again, if I have this underscore again, I get 81. If I do underscore divided by 9, right, so 81 divided by 9, I get 9. And now if I do my underscore, I get 9. So basically, this is a really simple way. Say you have some really big number. Let's say we have 9 to the power of 14. This huge number, let's say you forgot to save it to a variable, or you don't want to have to write it all out again, you can just reference it using the underscore. So again, if I forgot to save it to a variable, I can say big number, oops, is equal to underscore. Now that I reference big number, I get that big number, if you will. So to start off, very simple, very straightforward, not too complicated. And again, I know a lot of people don't use the interactive mode, but for those that do, this can save you a lot of time, and it's a lot easier to work with than having to sort of backtrack and access those values that you lost access to. So again, very simple, very straightforward. That's our first one. So I'll head back to the console since we won't be, I don't think we'll be using the shell. Yeah, we won't. So we'll close that and let's clear this. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the multiplication operator. This is work with Node. I can't say, again, as I prefaced earlier, the conversion of like Python code to other languages is unknown to me. But I know, Node.js is a scripting language. So maybe they have some sort of equivalent if it's not the underscore. But our next one that I want to discuss is the multiplication operator. So typically when you think of the multiplication operator, which is this little star right here, we think about it in terms of math, right? 5 times 6, we get 30, right? Simple stuff like that. But your multiplication operator can actually be used with other data types and other data containers to make your life a little bit easier. So let's say we had a program. Let me write it down. We wanted to create a program where the user enters their name and the amount of times they want their name printed. Very simple thing like that, okay? So we'll have a name variable. We'll say that's Varun. And then we'll say n is equal to the amount of times they want their name in a string. So we'll say 5. Now, when I print this, I can actually say name times n, which is interesting because what I've done here is I'm basically doing a string times an integer. And if I run this, oops, I actually get a valid output, right? I get Varun, Varun, Varun 5 times. And if I increase this to something like 8, I get it 8 times. And if I modify my string with a \n, I get it 8 times like that. So that's a pretty cool way to use your multiplication operator alongside your strings to sort of duplicate them on the fly. So you don't have to use anything like a for loop or sort of combine them into one big string. Another use case for this would be like when I was starting out, I had like those text-based games where you had like a little bit of a header. So if you wanted to print a little bit of a header out, you could do print like a dash and then print it 30 times or something like that. You get like a nice spacer header to sort of split up your output. So again, that was very simple, very straightforward. As I showed you guys, this multiplication operator is being used with strings. But if you remember earlier, I mentioned how it could also be used with data containers. Data containers as in lists, tuples, and other iterables like that. So let's say we wanted to create a list, create a list which contains 30 zeros, right? It's going to contain 30 zeros. So we want a list that's 30 long, and each item in our list is just another 0. What we can do for this is let's call this our list. We're going to say 0, right? I have it in the brackets times 30. If I print out our list, we get one big long list which has 30 different items. So if I print out the length of our list, you see we get 30. So here it's being used to create sort of an easy way to create a list of a certain length where each item in that list is the same exact thing. And I know for like things like NumPy, if you're familiar with NumPy, they also have things like this where you can create 2D arrays that are all filled with zeros. But for vanilla Python, if you will, you can use this as well. And it's pretty powerful, pretty straightforward. As I mentioned, it works with lists and it also works with tuples. So let me show you guys a tuple example is what we'll call this. Create a tuple which contains 30 zeros. We'll say our tuple equal to 0 times 30. And now if I print out our tuple, you'll notice I get 0. I don't get a tuple worth of 30 items. And if you had a sort of keen eye, you'll notice that I forgot my comma right here. Because again, Python, as it's reading it right now, is just reading it as 0 times 30. So you have to add the comma so that it knows we're working with a tuple. If we run this, ta-da, a tuple that is 30 long, filled with zeros. Again, as you know, tuples are immutable, but because this is how we're sort of creating it, this works perfectly fine. So far, in this short amount of time, I don't think this whole coding workshop is going to take the full hour, but so far we've covered accessing previous values in our interpreter using that underscore method. And here I showed you guys how to use the multiplication operator with strings, lists, and tuples so that you can take one value and sort of multiply it and reuse it, which might be helpful depending on the situation. And yeah, just to preface, a lot of things I'll cover aren't necessarily good for like the day-to-day, but every now and then you might find a need for them. So it's good to be aware of them. So let me go ahead and clear this. And then the next one is one that I think a lot more people will find more useful. And I think this is probably a little bit more commonplace and well-known, but I think it's worth covering anyway. It's called the dictionary comprehension. So if you remember, we have our typical list comprehensions. So, most people are familiar with these. These are one of the most, powerful things that Python has. And what a list comprehension does is it allows you to create a list in a one-liner. So let's say we had a list called R, and let me show you guys the traditional way to make this list. So actually, let's have a prompt. Make a list from 1 to 10, right? So a normal sort of for loop way of doing this would be say for I in range 1 to 11, r dot append I, right? If I print r, we get all the numbers from 1 to 10. That's our for loop method. Our list comprehension method, we'll say Q for this one, it's so much easier, so much straightforward. It's a lot more elegant. I for I in range 1 through 11. And now if I print Q, we get the same exact output, but instead of having it in 3 lines, we have it in 1. So it's a lot cleaner. And again, I'm sort of expecting you guys to be aware of how list comprehensions work. The focus on this segment is on the dictionary comprehensions. So just like how we have list comprehensions, we also have dictionary comprehensions. So for our dictionary comprehension, let's create a dictionary where the values are the keys squared. So what I mean by this is if we have, we'll call this sample, right? If we have 1, then the value would be 1. If I have 2, then the value would be 2. If my key is 3, then it's 9, 4, 16, 5, 25. It's sort of exponential like that, right? It's just x squared, if you will. But let's say we want to generate this from where our keys go from 1 to 10. How can we do that using a dictionary comprehension instead of like a for loop. So let me actually comment this out. We'll leave it here as reference. So what I can say is, we'll call this, what should we call our variable? We'll call it R. And what we can say is I raised to the second power for I in range 1 through 11. And I'll print it out, and then we'll go back and sort of discuss the anatomy of our dictionary comprehension. So let me print it out, and hopefully it should match up. Sorry, the first part of it should match up with our sample. And yeah, it does. Right, 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 9, 4, 16, 5, 25, 6, 36, so on and so forth, with the pattern being that the value, right, is the key to the second power. So now let's look at the anatomy of this dictionary comprehension. Again, a dictionary comprehension is powerful because it's quicker and it's able to get everything done in a nice, elegant one-liner. So you'll notice that this is where we have our sort of semicolon, right? And I is that value that we get from our range. And then I to the second power is what calculates our value. So basically what this is saying is, hey, Python, I want you to take this range function, right? And again, our range function will return 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I want you to take each I value, right? I want you to take that I value and make it my key, and then take that I value, square it, and make it my value. So just to sort of break it down a little bit more, our range function will basically return 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so Python is going to say, hey, I'm going to go through each one of these. So let's take this 1, right? This 1, right, my I is going to be my key. The value for this key is going to be my I to the second power. So in this case, it's 1. Then it's going to move over to my next number, which is this 2. It's going to say, hey, this 2 is now my I value. And when I square this 2, that's going to be my, this 2 is my key. And then when I square this 2, that number is going to be my value. And then that's how I get my 4. So dictionary comprehensions, really powerful, really elegant, in my opinion. But if you make them too long, then they get a little messy to work with. And that sort of brings us to our halfway point. So before I continue, moving on with this, I do want to sort of touch base with you guys, see if you guys have any questions, anything you want me to, touch back over, reiterate over, anything like that. I'll sort of open up a minute, if you will, for questions, if anyone has any. Wow, geez. Yes, GYK Gamer asks, actually I can pin them now, so you can see the question when I refer to it. Replit is free, yes. Of course, we have things like Hacker Plan that you can pay for if you want more features and stuff like that. But for the core functionality of Replit, it's completely free. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, but if any do come up, feel free to stop me. I'm more than happy to sort of touch back on them. So now let's get to the meatier stuff. Again, it's still pretty simple, but this stuff is going to make things a little bit easier for when you're coding. JSON with Python. I'm not sure what the question is asking, but yes, you could open this into a JSON if that's what you're referring to. So the next thing we're going to talk about, and I'm sure people who are watching have definitely used this because this is really popular, are F strings. F strings or dot format. Just to reiterate for people who aren't aware, F strings or dot format, the dot format string method, are a great way to cleanly or elegantly embed variables inside of a string. So let's say I have a name variable my name is Varun Patel. And then I have another variable. Actually, sorry. I want to print out my name is Varun Patel. All right. Or I want to print out my name is name, whatever the name variable is. I can very elegantly use an F string, right? And that'll work just fine. And if I change this up, let's say I get rid of my last name, it still works, right? So an F string is a great way to sort of embed it. And this is nice. It's cleanable. Random question, but is there a Python equivalent of char code add in JavaScript? If I remember, I got to look this up real quick. Char code add. Okay, yeah. I don't think there is a direct conversion, but I think, hold up, let me open up the, where is it, shell. We can test it out in interactive mode. I think it's ORD of like, yeah. And then if you do like the CHR of the number, you get it back. So the ORD and CHR functions. I know it's a little off topic, but again, maybe these might be helpful depending on what you're doing. I don't know. I just read that it's a number between 0 and 65,535. I don't know if the ORD function, we'll have to read into that, but I think this might be a good starting point for you to look at. I'm actually kind of surprised I remember that on the fly. But getting back to it, our F strings allow us to really cleanly format our strings. And again, I can show you it with dot format as well. Where we say my name is, we'll put our little brackets and then we'll put dot format name. And if I run these two, they should return the exact same thing. They do the same thing, but dot format is a little bit older. If I remember correctly, F strings are Python 3.5, 3.6. We're currently on like 3.10 or 3.11, so this is sort of the norm now. But what if I could tell you that F strings can do a lot more actually than just embedding your variables? And actually for the rest of this segment, I'm just going to be using F strings, but the dot format is pretty much equivalent. How is the second one working? Let's take a look at that. So the second one, this dot format, I'm assuming you're referring to. But the second one is basically the same thing as the first one. Now, here's what it looks like in plain English. Python. This is me talking to Python, if you will. I think it's the best way to explain it. Hey, Python, I've got this string, right? It's my name is, and I've got these two brackets. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to use that handy dandy dot format method. And what that dot format method is, it's going to look for any of these brackets, right? And let's say it found a bracket. Then it's going to embed that variable into that bracket, if that makes sense. So basically, the dot format's like, hey, I've got this string. I'm looking through it. I see a bracket. I've been given a variable, right? Our name variable. I'm going to take that variable and inject it wherever that bracket is. So that's sort of the English, the English equivalent of what Python is doing here with our second dot format. Good question. Oh, this Google Translate thing keeps popping up. But let me get back to it. So we have our, let's say we wanted to print our name, right? Sorry. We wanted to print my name is. Actually, I take that back. Let's say we wanted to print our name, but instead of printing it like, just normally like this, we wanted to center it, or we wanted to offset it by a certain amount. What we can do is we can use an F string, right? And if I do this and put the string stuff in, oops. So we get the same thing, right? Now I can actually put a semicolon here, and I can put a up caret. I forgot what it's called. Where is it? There it is. And 30, an asterisk right here. And let me show you what it does, and then I'll break it down. We print this. Our name, my name, sorry, is sort of surrounded by these asterisks. And this whole thing, the length of this entire string is 30, right? So let's break it down. Let me show you how this is working, this anatomy of the section right here. So when you provide this semicolon, you're telling Python, hey, I know you're embedding this variable, but I also want you to do some special stuff with it to make it a little bit more interesting. Python's like, okay, what do you want me to do? Well, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to, around my name, my variable, I want you to surround it with asterisks. So if I change this to like a plus sign, now it's plus sign. So this is sort of like my fill character, right? If I make this nothing, it's just a bunch of spaces. So we'll leave it as plus signs for now so we can sort of tell what's going on. The next thing is, okay, so you want to fill it up with plus signs. All right. This up caret, I forgot what it's called, is telling Python, hey, I want you to take my variable, right, this name variable, and I want you to align it within the center. Notice how this is center aligned. So if I change this to a less than sign or greater than sign, whatever it is, it's now pushed to, it's now left justified. If I make it the other way, it's now right justified. So this is sort of how do you want to format your string? So we'll leave it in the center. And then the last thing is, how long do you want the entire thing to be, right? We're adding this padding, right? The plus signs, we're formatting this in the middle, but how long is the full thing going to be? Well, this whole thing is 30, so if I make it 20, it should get shorter. And then if I make it 10, it's even shorter, right? But I'm still trying to even out the padding on both sides. So that is a great way to really easily, again, this is pretty elegant in my opinion. And it's a nice way to format those strings beyond just sort of embedding them. Hey, what's up? Thanks for joining. And again, if this is sort of like this, to me, when I was researching for this thing, I was like, wow, this is really interesting. But it's hard to remember, right? This is a lot of stuff. So the good thing about Python is if we head back into our shell right here, go into our interactive mode. Let me actually clear this. If we go into our interactive mode, we can actually type help. And in this help function, we can type in caps formatting. Now, if I run this, this is the format string syntax. So this is sort of your go-to guide on how to sort of format those F strings. And again, it's a lot to go through. And if I have to press enter to get to the section I want to talk about, it's a lot. But I'll show you the part that is important. There we go. Format specification mini language. I think this is what we need. Yes. So you'll notice that when we broke down the anatomy of this, right, we had the fill object. How do we want to align it? Do we want to align it in the center, to the right, to the left? How long do I want it to be? That's all of these characters. So that fill character can be whatever we want it to be. It can be plus, it can be an ampersand, it can be a number, whatever. Our align, right? This is center, this is right, this is left. The width, right? That's how long we want it to be. So these are all different customization abilities that you can look into, that you can research. And if we scroll up a little bit, actually, you can even do, what's it called? Like conversions on this. So like the str function, I can call it using this, stuff like that. So this dot format and this f string it's huge. I mean, you can really dive deep with how you can use this thing, and it can save you a lot of time. So if you do a lot of string stuff, right, where you have to manipulate your strings and stuff like that, I highly recommend doing additional research on this, taking a look through the docs. I mean, it is some really magical stuff that you can do with this. And again, what we've talked about here is very much surface level. It's not, too deep, but this should sort of make you a little bit more curious on what it's able to do. And finally, I'm actually wrapping this up a lot faster than I thought I would. I thought this whole lesson was going to take an hour, but so far it's only 30 minutes. But finally, our last one, not as important as the F strings, in my opinion, but still very nice. And this is unpacking a list. Again, before I continue, I just want to preface that a lot of the examples I showed in this, they're very beginner level. They're not meant to sort of dive deep. They're merely meant to sort of inspire some curiosity with the content I'm covering. So again, I do highly recommend you guys to do some additional research, take a look at the docs, check out Google, check out YouTube. So let's say we have a list, let's say we have a list of student scores. And from this list of student scores, or an array, or whatever you want to call it, we want to extract the lowest value, the highest value, and the middle value. Mass, did you watch the match? Yes, I watched it up until 2-2. I haven't checked who's won yet. Please don't tell me. I got to go back and watch the highlights. I didn't know that the match is going to be the same day I'm hosting the event, but that's all right. So we have our, let's call this scores, right? And we'll just say, 39, 86, 100, 49. These are really bad scores. Oh my God. 78, 87, 84, 77. These are a little bit better. So let's say we have all of these scores. And the first thing I actually want to do is, if I want to pull out the lowest, highest, and all the middle values, I need to sort my thing. So I'll wrap this in the sorted function. Argentina wins. Damn. If I print scores, you can see it's now all ordered up, right? So now what I can actually do is I can do some multiple variable assignment using Python. Again, as I said before, I'll do it and then I'll break it down. Lowest, middle, highest is equal to scores. And if I print lowest, I can print middle, and I can print highest. Now, give you guys a second to sort of guess what this is going to do, and then I'll go ahead and run it. Okay. If you've locked in your guesses, I'm now going to go ahead and run this, and look at that. So we had our normal list, and actually let me print out the normal list, the whole thing formatted up. So we had our entire list of scores, right, ordered from lowest to highest. And I said, hey, Python, what I want you to do is I want you to break this list into 3 parts. I want you to take the first item and save it to this lowest variable, right? Because again, we're going from lowest to highest. So the first item is going to be the lowest, and the last item is going to be the highest. So I want you to break these up into these lowest and highest variables, which it has successfully done, right? 39 and 100. And then all these other variables that I'm not specifically looking for, right? All the ones that are in the middle or between the lowest and the highest, just extract that into its own list. And that's what it's doing right here. It appears my REPL is rebooting, but that's okay. So, unpacking list. This is all I really wanted to talk about with this one. But again, this should inspire you. You're working with lists. This could be an elegant way to break your list up into parts without having to use something like a for loop or having to use like a Lambda function or a filter or a map or whatever. This in and of itself is faster, and it can get the job done a lot more efficiently. And I think that's all I've got really for this sort of Python tips and tricks. There's a lot of more stuff, but these were the 5 or 6 things that I wanted, that I thought were, worth focusing on and sort of zoning in on. So before we go ahead and call the stream, I'll sort of list out everything we talked about, do a quick review. And while I'm doing that, feel free to ask any questions about content that we covered. So again, we talked about using the, Devanchu asks, what is the asterisk doing in the middle? Let me pin this question. So what the asterisk is doing, let's actually get rid of this and see what happens. Should get an error, and I do get an error. Now, what the asterisk is doing is, again, if I run this, I essentially have 3 variables here, right? Lowest, middle, highest. But in my array, in my list, I have, let's see, 8 items. So if I have 3 variables and 8 items, I can't save each item to its own variable, right? So we read the error we got. We said value error, too many values to unpack. So what this is saying is, dude, you've given us 3 variables, but this list has 8 different items. So when I add this asterisk, it's saying, hey, Python, my lowest will be its own thing, right? Take that as a specific number. My highest will be its own thing. But the middle will just be a list of all the other items that can't be fit in. So now my scores list has been broken up into 3 different things, and that can be saved to 3 different variables, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure before I move on. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to assume we're okay. So, review time. Just a quick overview. That makes sense? Perfect, good. A quick overview before we call it. We talked about the underscore in the interactive mode. Great way for reusing values that you've previously referenced or forgot to save to a variable. Next, we talked about the versatility of the multiplication operator. So we used it to take a string and multiply it to make it a one long repetitive string. We used it to take our lists and tuples and make lists and tuples that have the same element a X number of times. We then had our dictionary comprehensions. We had our dot format, F strings, and then we finally ended it out with unpacking a list or unpacking an iterable. Hydrogen Macro asks, could you theoretically do lowest? Let's see. Could you theoretically do lowest, highest? I think you could. I think you could actually. Let's actually try. I think that's worth exploring. Command Z. So what we should expect from that is if we sort of look at the anatomy, we should get our lowest or highest value, yes. And then from our middle values, are we going to pull another low, high, and then another set of middle values? Let's see. That was a tuple he had. So L, we had M, and we had H. So let's actually run this before I check the variables. Middle is not defined. Oops. Let's get rid of this. Okay. So that works, and we're not seeing any errors. So let me press print L, print M, print H. So M should be like, yes, look at that. So that does work just fine. So what we've taken is our lowest, our middle, highest, and then in our middle, right, that internal section, from there, we once again decompose it into that part's lowest, highest, and middle. I'm telling you guys, Python has so many features like built in that, I mean, like a lot of built-in functionality that it's sort of hard to keep track of how good it is. And I'm sure we can go even deeper with this up until the point where we don't have enough values, but that's great. That was a great question. Definitely worth, looking at. So yeah, I think that's all I have really for you guys. I'm not seeing any questions. So I think I'm going to go ahead and call it there. And again, I know I've been saying this a lot throughout the stream, before I leave, guys, definitely do some more research with this stuff. It is definitely worth playing around with and getting familiar with. It is extremely powerful, and it'll only serve to help you when you guys are coding, especially that dot format stuff. That stuff is, boom, really nice. Because again, my sort of mantra is the best way to make a good, a good solution, a good algorithm is to always be familiar with your basics, right? The core functionality, because that stuff is often the fastest. So again, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for the lovely questions and the engagement. I had an absolutely amazing time. So yeah, thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and call the stream here. So have a lovely day. Take care, practice, be safe.